F11.
F11, but you have to
press
play.
Yes, it's like my one. It's like my laptop. There we go. Right. I'll
use the mic.
use the microphone rather than shouting. That's much better for my voice.
Another imposter.
I'm going to talk about load balancing, load testing, and strategies for web map services. This originally started out as sort of a sub-tweet for some of our customers that were really annoying me. So I wrote this talk just to, knowing that they'd never see it because they didn't come to this conference. But it makes me feel better to have got this off my chest. You get a lot of customers who turn up and say, we need clustering, we need a big cluster because we've got really big maps and we've got hundreds of customers. And are you sure? You really sure you need this hassle of clustering? You really want is more speed and less fuss. So step back from when you say, oh, we've got to implement clustering on our WMS servers. Actually, the question is, do you need to? How fast is it going at the moment? Can you make it faster without that effort? I'll talk a little bit about how you load test your web map server, so you can find out how fast it's going really before you put it into production and it falls over. And we'll talk a little bit about clustering if you really have to do it. So, first question is, why do you want to put a cluster of web map servers on the internet? Do you need high availability? So do you need redundancy? If one of the servers falls over, do you automatically have to have another one step in to fill that gap? And to be honest, you're a local council. You probably don't actually need redundancy. Nobody really cares whether they can look up planning applications in their website or whether they have to wait 5 minutes while your server reboots. But, you know, okay, you might have an important mission-critical thing that needs clustering. That's a good thing. Or are you doing it because you need scalability? Do you need more speed? Do you need to serve more users as faster? And again, you need to think about how many users you're expecting. Do you really expect thousands of users per hour to come and use your site, or millions of users per second, which is the sort of people we see people trying to cluster for? So the first thing you need to do, sort your data out. GeoServer is fundamentally limited. The bottleneck is how fast can it get data off the disk and into the map image. And that is the first thing to speed up. Doesn't matter how many clusters you put together, if it's still reading from a very slow format on a slow networked disk, it's possibly using a slow database. I won't name any names, but we all know who it is. Who's the slowest database out there? There's a reason they won't let you run performance tests. Are you on a slow operating system? Is your virus scanner using up like a third or half of your CPU all the time? Every time you open a file, does it feel the need to virus scan your rasters for you? Could be that that's not helping you get maps out quickly. No amount of magic clustering will speed up your maps at that point. So go away and fix those problems first. Did you configure your container? Whatever container you're using to run GeoServer, there's a number of configuration changes you can make to speed it up. There's a page here running in production, and these notes are all online, so you can go and click on these blue links later if you want to investigate further. Set the relevant Java virtual machine flags that are listed. That changes from version of Java to version of Java. So just because you did tuning back when you installed GeoServer first, you might want to revisit that now that we've moved on to Java 8. A lot of the garbage collection flags have changed. Switch to the Marlin rasterizer. This speeds things up. I believe we've turned that on by default for the most recent releases, so that's slightly out of date. Install the native JI and ImageIO extensions if you're serving a lot of raster data. That will speed things up. Turn your logging down. Just because when we were setting it up, you had logging turned up really high, so you got to see every possible error. Now you're running in production. You really want to minimize the number of things that are getting written to disk every time somebody asks for a map. And GeoServer can be really, really chatty when you've got it in debug mode. You'll also find that it fills the disk up if you're not careful. if you leave it in debug mode, you'll suddenly run out of disk space to store the log files. Okay, so you've done all that. You've improved the quality of your data. You've stored it in a sensible format. You've indexed it. You've made sure your rasters aren't, your rasters are nicely tiled and compressed, and they've got overviews on them. You're using a proper computer operating system. You've turned the virus scanner off, whatever. You think it's still not fast enough. So the next thing to check is, are you using a cache? Instead of drawing a new map every time somebody asks for a map, can you use the last map you drew for somebody else? Can you use bits of that last map you drew for somebody else? This is very easy. GeoWeb Cache is built into GeoServer. If you don't like GeoWeb Cache, there's Map Proxy, there's Tile Cache. There are dozens of caching programs out there that will do this for you. They all make the assumption that you're using tiled layers rather than whole WMS requests. Again, it's very easy to switch that on. It's very easy to check that it's switched on. So as I say, you only need to draw each piece of that once. Again, precede your cache. If there are areas if you know every time somebody opens your application, they're going to look at the whole of the country, make sure the whole of the country is stored in your cache so it doesn't get drawn. Zoom down to maybe level 5, zoom level 5, level 6, 7. Depends on how much you think people are going to zoom in. And then probably what I usually recommend is you zoom in on your chief executive's house, because the first thing he's going to do when you demo it to him is zoom in on his house. He's going to want to see how fast it goes. So check that works. Zoom in on your home offices, places that people are likely to visit a lot. Make sure you precede those. So then you're saying, well, is that fast enough? Seems to work when the chief executive's testing it in the demo. That's good. Is it going to be all right when we actually release it to the customers? And this, you need to start benchmarking your server. So use JMeter is the test suite that I recommend, but there are others available if you prefer non-Java-based test environments. As I say, if you're truly paranoid, JMeter at the start to get a baseline, and then do all of the things I've suggested, like fixing your data, run JMeter again. Did you get an improvement? If it got worse, undo those changes. Play with all the flags. I trust Andrea has done this and has written down the definitive set of flags, but if you're really paranoid, do it yourself, test them. And if you find that some of them aren't as fast as possible flag settings, put a change request into our documentation so everybody else can benefit from your experiments. So at least once you've done that, make sure you've got a baseline so you can tell whether clustering has sped up your application or not. It can slow it down if you're not careful. So to use JMeter, what we'll need is a representative set of user requests. With any luck, you've got an existing application or some log files from an equivalent application that will give you an idea of how people use your maps. Or you'll have to do some browsing to generate a representative session. You can then go through that log file, extract the relevant parameters, and we can build a JMeter test plan, which basically sits back and pretends that it's hundreds of people running that same set of requests. So, access logs. Whenever somebody asks for a map from your server, a note is made of this in your access log. This is covered by the GDPR for anybody who's worried. That IP address is personally identifiable note data. You need to notify people you're storing it, and you're going to use it for routine monitoring and logging purposes. See how many people rush from the room to update their settings now. So you can see the first set of numbers is your IP address, then there's the date that you did this, and then there's a note of what pages you actually requested. And the bottom one down here, you can see where I'm actually asking for a WMS map layer. It goes off the edge of the page. So we can extract the interesting bits out of those files. You can use awk or grep or sed. It's quite hard work. I started off doing this, and it turned out to be much harder than I thought to do it. So I automated it. I've written a small Java program that extracts the interesting bits from a standard, the ones everybody uses, or from Microsoft's log files, because obviously Microsoft chose a totally different format for their log files. just to make things interesting. But you feed it a log file, you specify some things you're interested in. So I've said I'm interested in any line that contains WMS or WMTS, and then I want to extract the request, the bounding box, the layers, the width and height, the layer name, tile matrix set, and the file that I want to read from. The file I want to write them out to, I mean, at the end. And it's quite flexible, so if you want to play with that, again, there's a link there. You can download that from GitHub. There's also a pre-provided JMX file there to get you started with JMeter. Basically, you start JMeter up, you load the JMX file, which is the test program. You load up that CSV file you've just created with the interesting bits you've extracted from the log file. You can run it to check that it's actually working, that you've got the addresses correctly, and your GeoServer is up at the time. You can get really stunning fast results if your GeoServer has crashed before you start running the tests, or you forgot to start the test server you're running it against, because it just returns null, 404, very, very fast. And you think, oh, it's brilliant. My machine will do thousands of responses a second. And you look at the output and go, no, that's not really what I was looking for. So don't get overexcited too quickly. So check your errors, and then you can adjust the number of threads to your expected number of users. And it's not exact. You pick, maybe 100 threads, or maybe 200 threads, 500 threads. It's going to go faster than your average user does, because your average user actually looks at a map a bit before they zoom in some more, or scrolls across the page. But that gives you a better feel for what your speed is. And finally, when you actually come to get your accurate timings, if you run it without the user interface turned on, it means your operating system doesn't interrupt it to do screen refreshes and things. You actually get a realistic time. So for anybody who's not used JMeter, that's what a JMeter screen looks like. It's a standard user interface. You select it, this is your thread group. So you're saying, here I'm saying I want to simulate using 10 users. I want to go through the loop 100 times. You can say I want to loop it forever, or I can, there's a ramp up period, so you don't suddenly launch 200 users into it. You have maybe 10 users to start with, and it builds up gently over time. Here's where you'd specify what your default requests are. So that's where you say, where's the GeoServer that I want you to test? And this is going to get filled in on all of the subsequent requests it makes. So here I'm testing against localhost 8080, because obviously I didn't want to try it on any of our production machines. Hint, don't ever run JMeter against your production machine, because you can completely crash the machine if you're not careful. Finally, if you set up this CSV, this is where it reads in the CSV file, and then it uses the headers from that to fill in this section. So that's the WMS request it's going to make. So it's a get map request, and then it fills in. These are the parameters it's going to add to the request, and the ones that are filled in with brackets at the end, so these ones here, are read in from the CSV file. So each request makes a different request for different layers and for different bounding box. But I've set them so the projection and the WMS version is always the same. But you can set those up again if you regularly serve maps in different projections, you could extract that from your log file and fill that in. The get tile requests are very similar, obviously, except that you have a tile matrix set and a tile matrix, tile columns and rows in there. And you run it, and there you go. You can see it's run down. These are each of the requests it's made. You can turn on scrolling automatically. And then if you click on them, you can see to check that it did actually get back a map tile. Not, you haven't got back a pink tile or an error message, because again, it'll go really fast if it's returning error messages because you've got one of your parameters wrong. So you'll think you've got really, really good speed up. So you do need to check that it's actually finding the map tiles. And I probably should say that that's probably Ordnance Survey copyright. So you've done all your JMeter testing. It's not fast enough for your expected number of users, even with your caching turned on. So you need to cluster. Or maybe you just need to cluster because you want some high availability. You're worried about people coming to your site and the GeoService instance being down. Simplest answer is get GeoServer running on one machine, copy it onto another. Snapshot the VM, start it up as a second VM. That's the easy way to do it. And that will work if you're only going to do a simple cluster of 2 or 3. So if you're really just interested in high availability, snapshot them or just copy those files across. Doesn't even have to be another machine. You could just run it. You could run 2 on the same machine if you're just worried about Tomcat falling over rather than the actual machine falling over. And that depends on your environment. But you're better to be installing an active clustering extension. And that's going to let you actually update a master server and have those changes propagate to your slave servers without having to do manual copying and keeping your config in sync. Because again, you can mess that up quite easily. But if you've got a simple site that doesn't change very often, you don't add new data to regularly, simple answer, just snapshot the machine and run a second copy. So, active clustering, you go to the latest community builds, obviously for the server that matches your release, which was 2.12 when I was doing it. It'll be 2.13 now. It'll be 2.14 next month. Download these 2 plugins. There's the JMS clustering plugin and the ActiveMQ broker. This provides you with a distributed GeoServer control system. GeoSolutions have an excellent training course that they've put out on the web for people to work through, and there's a manual as well that gives you more details about how to actually set them up. It's not very difficult, it's a bit fiddly, it'll take you most of an afternoon probably to get it all up and running. But as I say, if you need the speed then you can do it. If you don't, just don't worry about this. So clustering machines, you need Tomcat to run the instance. If you're running multiple things on the same machine, you can do it with AJP routing and server XML for Tomcat. Use Apache HTTPD as your load balancer in front of it. Again, you need to add the modules proxy balancer, proxy AJP, and proxy HTTP in front of it. Again, there are lots of tutorials out there about how you set up Apache to be a load balancing proxy. So essentially, you add those lines to your configuration file, and you can specify where you want the request to go. I've used both of them on the same machine here, but those could be multiple machines. And you specify how you want them to load balance. Do you want it to be by busyness, by last used, round robin? I usually use by busyness because some GeoServer requests can take a long time. Some of them are very quick because they've gone straight to the cache. If you go strictly on rotation, you can end up with the busy machine gets more requests sent to it before it's ready for them. Once you've done that, once you've set your cluster up, run JMeter again. Check that all of the instances of your cluster are getting hit, that you haven't messed up and it's still not just, you've got a load balancer, you've got 4 machines, but only machine A is ever getting any requests, because you've probably messed something up in your config then. Did it go faster? As I say, if you set it up wrong, if you cluster 4 GeoServers all running on the same machine and you put the load balancer on it and you're running JMeter on that machine, it will definitely go slower when you're finished, especially if it's your laptop and you're doing it offline. But it should go faster, so you're finished. That's got you up to your speed. Hopefully your JMeter's running at the right speed. If not, you can add more and more things to the cluster. If not, look for your caching again. Make sure you're using your caching correctly. Look for where your bottlenecks are. See whether you've got some requests that can't be tiled, can't be cached because they've got parameters on them. Do you really need those to be done all the time? Do you need those to be turned on by default? Could you make it so users turn that on only occasionally? As I say, add more machines. You can always throw money at this problem to solve the problem and to get more speed. It's amazing how few organisations decide that they want to spend more money. Most of them say, actually, I think that probably is fast enough for our users after all. When you say, for another £1,000 a month, we could do this faster. Okay?
Thank you, Jan. Thank you very much.
No, that wasn't what I wanted to do.
Jan, I will skip the questions. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But Jan is
Get back on
around, so you can ask him very technical questions. He'll be around for free. You don't have to pay. After the conference, if you want to optimize your servers, you probably have to to pay him. But right now, it's for free. So let's go to the coffee break and let's try to make back to the schedule and start the next session at 10 minutes past 11. Thank you very much.